This is the new 2025 Chevy Corvette ZR1, the C8 ZR1, and it's a monster. It has over 1,000 horsepower. It'll do more than 230 miles an hour. It is a true American supercar. And today I'm going to take you on your most thorough tour yet of the quirks and features of what might just be the most amazing American performance car of all time.
Let's get it.
Today's video is sponsored by Cars and Bids, which is my online car auction website for modern enthusiast cars. So far, Cars and Bids has hosted more than 20,000 auctions of special, cool, exciting cars like this and this and this and this. So, if you're looking to sell your enthusiast car, reach a wide audience at carsandbids.com. All right, time for a tour of the new C8 Corvette ZR1 and all of its quirks and features, but let's start with the basics. So, for years now, going back decades, the ZR1 has been the top dog Corvette. It was really popularized with the C4 ZR1, the C4 Corvette, which came out in 1990 with 375 horsepower. Now, there was no C5 Corvette ZR1, but it came back for C6 with about 640 horsepower. Then the next gen, the C7 ZR1, had 755 horsepower, but this blows them all out of the water with 1,064 horsepower and an amazing 830 pound-feet.
Oh, I see what they trying to do.
As you can imagine,
they trying to come out the Lambo with the Revolto.
Some insane performance figures. Chevy says 0 to 60 in 2.3 seconds. That makes this the quickest Corvette of all time and a few tenths quicker than the new Corvette Z06, which is already incredibly fast. Chevy also says this will do a sub 10-second quarter mile, which is an unbelievable feat for a car coming out of the factory. You can go buy this, go to a drag strip, and run a 9, and then immediately get kicked out of the drag strip because you can't do that in a car like this without a lot more protective gear. Maybe most importantly, though, and most impressively, this car will do a top speed of 233 miles per hour. These days, top speed has become so hard to reach with the Bugattis and the Koenigseggs, most automakers don't even bother going for it. But here, 233 is a really impressive top speed figure, especially for a car like this. Absolutely amazing performance, which you'd expect given 1,064 horsepower. Now, as you can imagine, getting this car to those numbers, both horsepower and the performance numbers, took an enormous amount of really serious, dedicated work to all aspects of the car. I'm going to cover all the changes and upgrades to the ZR1, but let's start with the engine. Twin turbocharged V8, Chevy calls it the LT7
Don't get
V8.
no better than the V8,
the Z06, the new Corvette Z06 uses an LT6 V8, but don't let the similarities in name fool you. Chevy tells me these engines are vastly different. They were co-developed together and they use the same engine block, but aside from that, all of the internals and basically everything else in the ZR1 is completely different, upgraded, improved in order to try to get out more power. In fact, Chevy told me all about this engine and its development, and one of the interesting things they said was that the design brief for this engine in this car was just to make as much power as they possibly could do reliably and within street legality. That's what they told the engineers, and that's what the engineers did. Just
we don't need them blowing up, man.
It's a huge upgrade, more than 300 horsepower more than the previous ZR1, but that's what they wanted, just more power. In fact, Chevy told me they even had to upgrade the horsepower measuring devices at the Chevy factory facilities in order to measure the horsepower of this car because they didn't have anything that could withstand over 1,000 horses like this engine makes. Now, obviously, a lot of other upgrades beyond just the powertrain go into this car as well. Chevy told me the transmission has been significantly beefed up compared to other C8 Corvette models. Specifically, this car has stronger gears than other C8 Corvette models, and the input shafts have been beefed up to help deal with the massive amount of extra power. And of course, there's more. This particular ZR1 has the optional ZTK package, which is the high downforce package that makes it as track focused as it can possibly be. This is roughly similar to the Z07 package in the new Corvette Z06, but just more. One good example of that is the rear wing, which is absolutely huge. This carbon fiber rear wing is massive, gigantic, and surely one of the largest rear wings I have ever seen in any production car, and frankly larger than what you see in a lot of race cars. It is absolutely huge, and yes, bigger than what you get in the Z06 with the Z07 package. The ZR1 with ZTK also comes with this front splitter, as you can see, carbon fiber splitter that's intended to direct airflow around the car for maximizing aerodynamics. Now, you get that front splitter on the Z06 with the Z07 package, but one thing you can't get on the Z06 is this mesh air compartment in the front. This is an interesting one. Obviously, it brings air into the car, surrounded by this kind of carbon fiber shield, and air comes in here, passes through an intercooler, and then goes into the engine again to help make more power. You don't have this in the Z06, and the most interesting part about this whole situation up here is that it completely removes the trunk, the front storage area that you have in other Corvette models. Now, strangely enough, there's still a button on the key fob that you can press to open up this front compartment and gain access to the storage area that's no longer there. But if you wanted to check on your airflow intercooler situation, it's pretty easy to do. Just press the button twice and you're in, and you can do that.
Like you can't bring no bags
put anything up there because this car needs it for airflow. And here's another cool ZR1 upgrade over the Z06. Both cars have this Y-shaped panel on the side, which is completely different than the look of the side panel on the regular C8 Corvette. But only the ZR1 has a little air intake at the back of the panel, as you can see, which is there to help cool the brakes. Z06 doesn't get that. It's subtle, but it's yet another ZR1 improvement. And speaking of ZR1 improvements, maybe the most interesting is also one of the most understated. This panel here, this carbon fiber piece, is an air intake, and Chevy told me that this piece is here only on the coupe models, and it brings in clean, non-turbulent air into the engine to enter the induction system and obviously feed more air into the engine. It's only on the coupe because the convertible, of course, has a mechanism here as part of the process of making the top go down, so it loses this extra air induction. So I asked Chevy, what does this mean for horsepower figures? Because only the coupe has this kind of added benefit. And Chevy told me that official manufacturer horsepower ratings are measured in a very controlled, specific process by the Society of Automotive Engineers. And
it's just the way Doug be saying stuff.
Of this extra airflow during that process. But Chevy was very specific to tell me at speed, with all the air flowing in there, the coupe probably does make extra horsepower compared to the convertible because of these little air intakes on the side that the convertible doesn't have. That is an interesting fact. And since we're talking about back here, another very cool ZR1 trait is the look of the engine cover lid, which is obviously also the cargo compartment lid, giant rear panel back here. But specifically, the part over the engine is cool. It has this neat split window design, which is obviously a retro look intended to harken back to the days of the old 60s split window Corvette. But it's also surrounded by carbon fiber.
A little bit of nostalgia.
holes for ventilation in here, which obviously helps with heat dissipation. So not only is it a cool look, but it's actually functional and distinctive to the ZR1 only. And as you might imagine, there's still more. Let's talk brakes. The ZR1 has larger standard brakes than the Z06, and Chevy tells me the design has been revised in order to better dissipate heat, which is obviously important on the racetrack. Maybe more interesting and notable when you look at the wheel area is the wheels themselves, which are obviously made out of carbon fiber. Chevy told me they save 43 pounds with carbon fiber wheels compared to the regular wheels. That's a pretty big number, especially where it's located on the car. It's a big deal. These wheels are surely very expensive. You don't want to scratch one or damage one, but they will help you out with weight savings on the track for a faster time. And speaking of wheels, one interesting thing about this car is its rear wheel drive. That's especially interesting because Chevy now makes an all-wheel drive Corvette, the E-Ray, and that all-wheel drive helps it get a great launch and excellent acceleration, which you'd think would be especially important to this car because it has 1,064 horsepower. I asked the Chevy engineers behind this car, why didn't you go with all-wheel drive? And they said that just wasn't their performance brief. They wanted to make it as focused performance car as possible, and the added weight from all-wheel drive would have taken away from that more than they wanted. So even though that made it tremendously hard to deliver power to the ground with just the rear wheels going, adding all-wheel drive and switching the drivetrain just didn't fit in with what they wanted the ZR1 to be. Now, amazingly, one other interesting fact nugget that the Chevy engineers shared with me about this car is that top speed was not a goal of the ZR1. They wanted a track-focused supercar that did amazing lap times, but they weren't focused on top speed when creating the car, which is especially amazing to hear considering it did 233 miles an hour, which makes this one of the fastest cars on the road today, period. But top speed wasn't a goal, other than they wanted to make it faster than the C7 ZR1, which did 212 miles an hour. They thought it would have been kind of lame if the new car was slower than the old car, so it had to beat that. But it beat it by a significant margin, 20 miles per hour. It's also worth pointing out the top speed runs in this car are done without the ZTK package because the added downforce stuff also adds drag. It helps keep the car on the road, but for top speed runs, you want to be as slippery as possible, as aerodynamic as possible, and so you don't want a giant rear wing hanging off the car. And so this car didn't have that when it set its 233 miles an hour. Still a stock ZR1 configuration that you could buy, just not the cool one with the big wing. Now, beyond all of the performance upgrades to this car, let's talk through some of the cosmetic changes, which are also rather interesting. For one, badging. On the outside of this car, you have only one ZR1 badge. Well, two right here on either side, but there's nothing in the back or in the front to say ZR1. Then again, if you know, you'll know because of the split window rear end or the giant rear wing if you get it, or some of the other details like the intake that the Z06 doesn't have, or the front compartment opening that the Z06 doesn't have. If you know your Corvettes, you'll know instantly. Otherwise, the badge on the side will tell you. And then there's the engine, which is beautiful. You can look through that split window rear end and see the engine with its blue cover that looks very cool and very distinctively ZR1, obviously. The engine also includes a plaque signed by the engine builder with pride, telling you exactly who it was who made the powertrain in this car. It's a very special look through the split window to see
Great American muscle, y'all.
Also worth pointing out, if you look closely in here, you can see this little graphic of a rocket ship, which is a cool little Easter egg most people probably won't notice, but it's in there if you look closely. In fact, it's on both sides, the little rocket ship graphic, which makes sense because this car is quite a rocket ship. Of course, another distinctive C8 ZR1 feature will be its sound. This massive and massively cool flat plane crank V8. It sounds special. Take a listen.
Ooh, that thing's smooth. Gonna have to go catless though.
Now, unfortunately,
be
that
screaming, you
engine
feel
sound
me?
is as close as I'm going to be able to get to actually driving the ZR1 today. This is still a pre-production car. It's not yet ready for journalist drives. In fact, this car is the exact one that Chevy had in all of its press photos and pictures and materials when they first announced the existence of the ZR1
That thing
a
look
few months
nasty,
ago.
bro.
This car, they don't have a lot of them yet. They're not ready
It's
to
the
drive,
one, man.
but I do expect to get behind the wheel closer to this car going on sale, which Chevy says is sometime during 25. They haven't been more specific yet. But we still can go through the quirks and features of the interior, and we'll start with opening the door where you see on the door sill ZR1, reminding you just how special this car is as you cross the threshold. Now, beyond that, you
Not
don't
the
have
regular
a lot
one.
of ZR1 badging in here. You just have at the bottom of the steering wheel ZR1, and then also a little plaque between the seats that says Corvette ZR1, but that's about it. Not that you need that much, because the interior of this car is just so special anyway. The regular Corvette has a very special interior with this cockpit-like feel aimed towards the driver. Very neat overall
gonna lie.
design and look. It really is a special
look nice on the
place to
inside,
be in this
y'all. I
interior.
like the yellow,
And the
seat belts,
ZR1 kind of enhances things a little bit. For one, you get these very impressive
Steering wheel
sport
got the
seats
yellow
that are
little
heavily
strip on it.
bolstered to keep you in place in hard cornering. And of course, in the backrest, they have holes for a racing harness if you
Yellow stitch
choose
seats.
to mount one. This car also has
Carbon
a wide
everywhere,
array of
in and
top
out.
shelf materials between leather, as you can see, all over the dashboard with contrast stitching matching the exterior color, but there's also a lot of carbon fiber. Specifically in the center console area, you can see carbon fiber trim everywhere, which
clean.
underscores the sportiness of this car, and a lot of Alcantara on the steering wheel, the seats, and various other panels as well. Even the underside of the roof inside the car has this Alcantara and contrast yellow
hard.
stitch headliner,
Okay.
which frankly
It came
just
trim,
looks
man.
really cool and feels really cool to touch. And by the way, it's worth pointing out that yes, the new ZR1 isn't a fixed coupe. It has a T-top removable roof, just like the regular C8 Corvette. And of course, like I already mentioned, a convertible model will also be joining the lineup with a power-operated convertible, or you just remove the T-top. Both of them are effectively convertibles, although the coupe, this one, is more of a Targa than a traditional convertible. Next up, another cool feature in the ZR1 is this button on the steering wheel, this silver button marked simply Z. If you press that, it pulls up Z mode, which is this highly configurable performance driving mode that's very cool to have just at the push of a button on your steering wheel. Instead of having to
that
scroll
takeoff
through a
mode.
bunch of different drive modes to find yours, just press Z and you're in it. And the Z lights up on the steering wheel, which is very cool to see in that button. This
Extra
lit up
100
icon
horsepower right
reminding
there.
you that you're in your special drive mode. Now, speaking of the steering wheel, you will also notice that it isn't actually a wheel. It's not circular. Instead, it's almost like a hexagon, flat on top, flat on bottom. The sides are sort of curvy. It's a very distinctive look, but it's not unique to the ZR1. The regular C8 Corvette also has this sort of flat hexagon, almost squarish steering wheel, which is a cool aspect of the interior
ain't got
of
that
this car. In
Alcantara,
fact,
though.
like I mentioned, the ZR1 shares a lot of the already cool aspects of the regular C8 interior. Like, for example, this giant row of buttons and switches in the center. These are all of your climate controls, your heated seats, your cooled seats, airflow, temperature, all of that stuff is integrated into this kind of trick button stack in the center. It's certainly very unusual that they did that, but they did it. You also have a rather unusual gear selector in this car. You can see here in the center, park, reverse, neutral, drive. It's where you'd expect, but some of them are switches, some of them are buttons, manuals at the bottom. There's certainly no traditional gear selector in here. And the ZR1 also carries over this rather odd hand rest. You can see mounted in Alcantara with the Corvette logo on it, some contrast stitching, and the word mode.
You gotta rest your hand luxury, you know what I'm saying?
The
Speeding
dial
through the,
mounted
you
under
feel me?
this hand rest controls
Racing
the
all
drive
these
mode.
Lambos,
And
you know what I'm
can twist
saying?
this dial to go between all of the different drive modes in the car, except of course Z mode, like I mentioned, which is a button on the wheel. Also, another cool feature in this car is the rear view mirror, which is not in fact a mirror at all. Well, it can be. You can see it's a mirror right now, but look out of it and you don't really see much thanks to the design in the back of the car, the split window. It doesn't really function as a mirror. So you flip this switch at the bottom and suddenly it becomes a camera. And there's a little camera lens on the outside of the car. It's mounted right here, and that camera shows you what's behind you so you can see without any obstruction, which you would have in the mirror. That's a pretty cool feature. Also cool in this car, you have a button here in the center console right here. You press that, and it's the axle lifter to lift up the front end of the car so it won't scrape or get damaged on steep curves or inclines. Right next to this button, you also have a camera icon with the word front. You press that, and it instantly pulls up your front camera in your center screen. That's cool because this car has a lot of very expensive carbon fiber pieces all around the front that you don't want to scrape on anything. And so having easy access to a push button front camera and it's just there, that is very, very useful in order to pull into a parking spot or a tight space.
Yeah,
to
for the folks who can't drive, man.
Now, speaking of that center screen, it's basically shared with other Corvette models, and frankly, it's pretty good. You get a decent sized screen here tilted towards the driver, and it all works like you'd expect. It's very intuitive. You tap on it, it does what you'd expect. It includes
Google
Apple
Maps
CarPlay and Android Auto, which some newer General Motors vehicles do not, but this one still does, and it works well. It gives you a high-quality infotainment system, even though you're sitting inside an expensive, high-powered 230-mile-an-hour supercar, and that's pretty cool to have. Now, also, in terms of screens in this car, you have a gauge cluster screen. As you can see, a screen mounted behind the steering wheel shows you all the vehicle information, obviously the usual stuff you'd see from gauges, and it's reasonably configurable to be able to show you other information that you might want to dial up. Nice to see those two screens working together to kind of provide the driver with cockpit-like information directly in the line of sight. They're good to see and they're easy to use. In fact, when you consider those screens and also the high-quality materials in here and some of the other nice touches, the camera mirror, the line of buttons, you start to think this interior is actually pretty civilized, almost luxurious, if you will. It feels tame, high quality, nice inside this car, and I really wonder if it will actually feel like that when I'm able to get behind the wheel and get it out on the road later this year. Is this car going to feel luxurious like the interior suggests, or will it feel like a monster like the powertrain suggests? Frankly, I can't wait to drive this car and find out. And so that's the new 2025 Chevy Corvette ZR1, the C8 ZR1. Wow. This is a serious performance car with some amazing upgrades over the regular Corvette and even the mighty Z06. And I can't wait to get behind the wheel and drive it later this year. For now, that's your most thorough tour yet of the quirks and features of the new Corvette ZR1.
What y'all think, y'all?